the battle that changed the fate of nations. But it wasn't just about soldiers and swords. It was the food that fueled their victory. Imagine this: an army marching across deserts, building fortresses overnight, and facing enemies with the strength to march 30 kilometers a day with heavy gear on their backs. What was the secret to their strength? What kept them going despite the odds? It wasn't just their discipline or weapons. It was something simpler, something that powered the Roman legions from within. In this video, we'll uncover the surprising truth behind the Roman army's food system and how it became one of the empire's most powerful weapons. In the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire was at its height, a sprawling empire that stretched from the windswept hills of Britain to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt. An empire built on military might, political strategy, and an unwavering belief in their own supremacy. But behind their iron discipline, their unstoppable legions, and their ability to crush enemies, there was one element most people never considered: their food. The Roman legions, known for their tactical brilliance and unparalleled efficiency, were unstoppable on the battlefield. But what made them so effective wasn't just their ability to wield a sword or their disciplined formations. No, it was the foundation of their power, the food that fueled them. In this video, we'll take you inside the lives of Roman soldiers, from the generals to the lowly legionaries. We'll explore the food they ate, how they carried it across vast territories, and how it kept them alive, fighting and conquering in some of the harshest conditions the world has ever known. The Roman army was not just a military force. It was a machine, one that could endure endless campaigns, one that never stopped, never faltered. But behind this relentless drive was a system so intricate, so well designed, that it allowed these soldiers to function day after day, year after year. And it all started with something as simple as grain. The foundation of the Roman army's power was built not on the strength of their swords, but on something far more basic: food, more specifically, grain. For the Roman legionary, grain was not just food. It was fuel, sustenance, and a strategic resource. Every day, each soldier received a ration known as a nona, a daily supply that made up the lion's share of his sustenance. But this wasn't just a basic meal. It was a carefully calculated system designed to support a soldier's grueling march, their physical endurance, and their mental sharpness. The Romans didn't simply feed their soldiers. They engineered a food system to fuel their empire. The key to this system? Grain. Wheat and barley were the staples, and these were not just any crops. They were the lifeblood of the empire, cultivated in vast quantities across the Mediterranean, from Egypt's fertile banks to Sicily's sun-baked fields. Grain was cheap, caloric, and most importantly, durable. Unlike fresh vegetables or meat, grain could be stored for months or even years. It could be transported easily, even over long distances. And so, grain became the core of the Roman military's food supply. Each legionary received about 850 grams, roughly 3 Roman pounds, of grain every day. In theory, this amount might seem excessive, but the life of a soldier was grueling. Marching 30 kilometers a day with a 40-kilogram pack wasn't easy. In fact, during active campaigns, a soldier burned up to 6,000 calories a day. The ration of grain was meant to replenish those lost calories, but it wasn't ready to eat food. Soldiers had to grind their own grain into flour using a small hand millstone they carried with them. This task, as monotonous and tiring as it was, became as integral to a soldier's routine as cleaning their weapons or repairing their sandals. At the end of each long march, after setting up camp, soldiers would sit down, exhausted, and begin grinding their grain. This wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. The grain had to be turned into food, and there were a few ways to do it. The simplest was pulse, a thick porridge made from coarsely ground grains like wheat or spelt. With a bit of water and salt, soldiers could boil it into a hearty dish that would keep them full and provide much-needed energy. But for longer marches or situations when cooking wasn't feasible, soldiers relied on another creation: the biscuit. These hard, dry flatbreads were made by kneading flour, water, and salt into a dough, then baking them twice. The result? A product so tough it could survive months of travel without going stale. These biscuit cakes were the predecessor to modern army rations, and were often soaked in water, wine, or broth to soften them. In fact, many soldiers preferred this method of eating. No time to cook, no need to make a fire. These biscuit cakes were portable, long-lasting, and packed a punch in terms of energy. But the Romans knew that variety was the spice of life, and it applied to their food too. If a legion was stationed in a permanent camp, fresh bread was sometimes baked. But this wasn't the fine, yeasty loaves we might imagine. Roman bread was often dense and coarse, sometimes made with bran and sometimes sourdough. Even so, fresh bread was a luxury for a soldier, a sign of stability and organized service. Now we've talked about grain, the backbone of the Roman diet. But a soldier's ration wasn't complete without a drink. And the drink of choice wasn't water, but something far more unusual: pusca. This concoction, a mixture of sour wine and water, was much more than just a way to quench thirst. It was a vital safeguard against disease. In a world where clean water was a luxury, pusca had multiple benefits. The sour wine's acetic acid acted as a mild antiseptic, making the water safer to drink. It was also an electrolyte-rich drink, which helped soldiers stay hydrated during long marches under the burning sun. For the modern viewer, the idea of drinking sour wine mixed with water might sound unappealing, even torturous. But for the Roman soldier, it was a lifesaver, ensuring they stayed hydrated and free from disease as they marched across vast distances. But there was more to the Roman diet than just grains and pusca. Meat played an essential role, though in smaller quantities than grain. The Romans didn't waste resources on large amounts of fresh meat. Instead, they relied on salt-cured pork, the main source of protein in the Roman ration. Pork was ideal for this purpose. It was rich in calories, easy to preserve, and could be transported over long distances without spoiling. Soldiers often ate salted pork with their porridge, a combination that packed a punch in terms of nutrition. In areas with abundant cattle, beef, goat, and mutton were also part of the diet, but these were less frequent. Some soldiers even had the privilege of fresh meat from hunting, a resource that was actively encouraged in times of rest. When stationed in certain areas, soldiers could hunt wild game like deer, boar, and even fish. Vegetables also had a place in the Roman diet, though they were secondary to grain and meat. Onions, garlic, and lentils were staples in a soldier's ration. These foods not only added flavor, but also served medicinal purposes. Garlic was particularly valued for its antiseptic properties, believed to ward off diseases and even give soldiers strength. For all the simplicity of the Roman soldier's diet, there was one final and critical ingredient: salt. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a preservative, a vital commodity for the Roman army. Without salt, meat would spoil and food supplies would dwindle. Salt was so crucial that it was part of the soldier's salary. In fact, the word salary comes from salarium, the money paid to soldiers for the purchase of salt. The Roman army's ability to maintain this steady, reliable food system was a key element of their success. But what happens when that system breaks down? When food supplies run low and hunger sets in, that's when things get dramatic. Roman soldiers were no strangers to hardship. Their ability to survive in the face of overwhelming odds was one of the key reasons for the empire's expansion. But survival on the front lines was not just a matter of strength, strategy, or battle tactics. Sometimes it came down to food, or the lack thereof. Imagine the scene: a Roman legion, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces. The supply lines are stretched thin, and food rations are running dangerously low. For the soldiers, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a matter of life and death. Their bodies had burned through the calories from their grain and salted meat, and without a fresh supply, they were growing weaker by the hour. As the days dragged on, soldiers did what they had to do to stay alive. The desperate, gnawing hunger set in, and soon, the only option was to scavenge whatever they could. Leather sandals, once sturdy protectors for their feet, were now seen as a potential meal. Soldiers boiled their leather, stripping it of its toughness and turning it into a kind of broth. The taste? Unimaginable. But it was sustenance, a desperate attempt to trick the body into surviving just one more day. At the same time, any trees nearby were quickly stripped of their bark. This, too, was boiled into a thin, watery soup. It wasn't food as we know it, but it was a means of survival, a last-ditch effort to keep the soldiers from succumbing to hunger and exhaustion. And it didn't end there. With each passing day, the soldiers grew weaker, but their resourcefulness kept them alive. They began hunting for anything that could provide nutrition. Game animals, once a rare treat, now became their primary focus. Boar, deer, and even small birds were caught and cooked. But if no game could be found, they turned to the rivers. Fish, frogs, and crayfish were trapped and eaten, whatever the cost. Yet even that wasn't always enough. In some cases, soldiers resorted to the unthinkable. In the worst moments of famine, the harsh reality of war made even the most sacred taboos seem like matters of survival. Historical accounts from the siege of Alesia, for example, describe Roman soldiers eating the flesh of horses, mules, and even their fallen comrades. This was not a ritual of warfare, it was desperation. Survival was no longer about strategy or skill. It was about outlasting starvation. The very essence of survival lay not just in the weapons they wielded or the battles they fought, but in their sheer ability to adapt and endure. This stark contrast between the glory of the Roman conquests and the brutal reality of survival on the front lines painted a different picture of what it meant to be a Roman soldier. But even in the face of such adversity, the Roman military food system proved its worth. It was designed for endurance, not for luxury. And when the worst came, it was the simplicity of that grain, the versatility of that pusca, and the ingenuity of the soldiers that kept them going. The battle is raging. The air is thick with the clash of steel, the cries of soldiers, and the dust of war. The Roman legions stand firm, their shields locked in perfect unity. The enemy is relentless, but the Roman soldiers don't falter. Their strength, their discipline, their unwavering resolve are evident. But there's something else at play here, something even more vital than their swords and spears. It's the food that fuels them, the sustenance that has kept them marching, fighting, and enduring through the long days of battle. In the heat of this fierce conflict, where every second counts and the fate of empires hangs in the balance, the Roman soldiers draw strength from the very, food they've carried across deserts, through forests, and over mountains. The grain they ground, the pusca they drank, the salted pork they ate. It's all kept them going, despite the exhaustion, despite the pain. With every swing of the sword, with every step forward, they fight not just for glory, but for survival. The food that once seemed so humble now plays a pivotal role in the outcome of the battle. The energy from their grain gives them the endurance to keep pushing forward, while pusca keeps them hydrated and protected from disease. At a crucial moment, when the enemy begins to press harder, when the Romans might have faltered, it's their supply of food that makes the difference. The soldiers, despite being weary and famished, are able to keep going, and it's this very energy that enables them to turn the tide. They fight with a strength that seems to come from the food that's been their constant companion. It's not just a matter of physical survival, it's the tactical brilliance of knowing that food, simple, effective, and easily transported, was a secret weapon. While the enemy struggled with supply lines and logistics, the Romans stood firm. Their food, their rations, were a part of their strategic advantage. As the dust settles on the battlefield and the smoke of battle fades, the victory is clear. The Roman legions once again have triumphed. But as we look back on the victory, we realize something crucial. The Roman army's success wasn't solely about their weapons, their generals, or their tactical genius. It was about the food they ate, the nourishment that powered them through endless days of marching, fighting, and enduring. The Roman military food system wasn't just a means of survival. It was a weapon in itself. From the grain that provided long-lasting energy to the pusca that protected soldiers from disease, every aspect of their food system was designed for efficiency, adaptability, and endurance. In the most grueling conditions, it was their sustenance that allowed them to push through, to survive, and to ultimately conquer. But the lesson here goes beyond ancient history. The story of the Roman army's food system teaches us that even the smallest factors, things we might overlook, like what we eat and how we nourish ourselves, can have a profound impact on our success. It's a reminder that the foundation of any great empire, any successful endeavor, is built on preparation, resourcefulness, and the ability to adapt. The Roman legions may have conquered the world with their swords, but they sustained their empire with something simpler, something that powered their legions through adversity: food. If you found this story fascinating and want to dive deeper into the untold stories from history, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share this video with others who might enjoy it. The past is full of surprises, and we've only scratched the surface.